What's the most unbelievable wait, you don't get this moment you've had with another adult? Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the Vancher channel. Also, please share your thoughts on this video in the comments. Let's get started. Story 1. I had to explain to my coworker, M33, that the sun always rises in the east and sets in the west. After I told them that, they said, every day? Answer. Depending on where you live, that east can vary a fair bit. Where I live, Australia. 4. The sun only rises due east during the spring and autumn equinoxes. On the summer solstice, it rises in the southeast. On the winter solstice, it rises in the northeast. And in between those points, it steadily tracks in a northerly, after the summer solstice, or southerly direction, after the winter solstice. Even the path that the sun takes during the daytime varies over the year as well. This effect can be utilized with housing to build houses that block direct sunlight during summertime and are exposed to more direct sun during the wintertime to help make the house less dependent on artificial heating and cooling methods. Story 2. When I was a teenager, my mom was convinced I was doing substances. I needed to wee, and even though I was only in the bathroom for like 30 seconds, I came out and she was like, "Aha, got you." She said she knew I was doing substances in the bathroom because I was on my period and I didn't have time to change my tampon while I was in there. I told her I hadn't changed my tampon because it had only been in for like an hour. Then she asked how I had peed without changing my tampon. That's how I learned my mom didn't know that the urethra was separate from the female body part. I told her I just moved the string out the way. She was adamant that it's impossible to pee with a tampon in because then the pee wouldn't come out. She was about 50 years old at that time. She still didn't believe they were different holes. I had to go onto the computer and pull up a diagram, and she still refused to believe it, stating, "I think I would know if I had two different holes." Anyway, a few years later when I did start doing substances, she had no idea. Answer. My mom was convinced I stole the vegetable peeler for use as substances paraphernalia as a teen. Mind you, I was doing substances at the time, but it did not involve the vegetable peeler. To this day, I tell folks about it to see if maybe they can come up with a way it can be used to help consume any substances. Funny thing is, it was stuck behind stuff in the drawer and found when we moved. I still have it 30 years later. Story 3. A person that didn't want to get solar panels because they were worried if too many people had them, it would use up all the sun. Story 4. Guy at my first base got a girl pregnant and didn't understand how. We asked him if he knew how babies were made, and he legit 100 believed that you could have intimacy all you wanted, but wouldn't get pregnant unless you were married. Answer. There was a guy at my first base who came in from his lunch break freaking out. When we asked him what was wrong, he explained that his GF was pregnant. They hadn't been together very long, so his reaction was valid. However, he further explained that he didn't know how that could have happened. Cue everyone standing completely still, looking around at each other awkwardly, waiting for him to explain what he meant by that. I need to preface that he was not the sharpest tool in the shed at all. It was honestly impressive how much brain power this guy didn't have. He then said, verbatim, "Every time we did the deed, she peed after. Poor thing got pregnancy and a UTI mixed up, I guess." Story 5. I just had to explain credit cards to my 73-year-old mother. She didn't know that by paying only the minimum balance, she was racking up interest charges. She also didn't know that you could pay a credit card balance in full each month, like she didn't know that was allowed. It certainly explains a lot of my upbringing. Answer. My ex's father would pay extra on his credit card bill every month because, well, I never understood why, but he owed money on some equipment he had purchased and was being charged interest and would pay the minimum. I tried to explain to him that he would pay less in the long run if he put more money towards the loan, and paying the credit card company in advance did nothing for him, but he wouldn't listen. He just shook his head, smiled, patted my knee, and told me he wouldn't have a credit score of almost 600 if he didn't know how to play the system. Story 6. I once had a coworker who was quite religious and, in all honesty, not overly blessed with intelligence, tell me she'd had to rehome her cat. The cat was an unaltered female cat who was allowed outside and got pregnant for a second time. I asked her why she didn't have the cat fixed, and she said she shouldn't have to. The cat should know better than to be out whoring around, and she would not have an immoral cat in her home. I started to try to gently explain how cats work, but then decided the cat was better off elsewhere. ETA. I told my partner about this post and was told I need to add one more fun detail to this story. The cat's name was Angel. Really, Angel. And she was a white kitty. Answer: my friend's dog had puppies, and they kept 2 of them, 1 boy and 1 girl. After about 6 months, I asked when he was thinking of getting them fixed. He looked at me like I had just insinuated his grandma was doling out $2 blowjobs at the train station, saying, "They're siblings. They'd never do that." I told him they absolutely would, and even messaged my veterinarian friend who confirmed that yes, they will absolutely bang if left to their own devices. He refused to accept that until about a year later when the dogs had 6, slightly off, puppies. Story 7. My friend and I did a survey for 10 each. When we were through, the guy made us wait because he only had a 20. We offered to just take the 20 and split it ourselves. He didn't like that. Then I offered to accept the 20 and give him $10 change so he could pay my friend. He stood and stared at me with the gears loudly clanking in his head for maybe 15 seconds. Then he says, "No, we're just going to wait for change." Answer: I love when this happens. I went on holiday. The rental company charged a ridiculous premium to clean your car if it's dirty. So on the final day, I took it to the car wash. The total was 275 pesos. I had broken Bill's coins, adding up to 325. I wanted the change as a 50 note. It took 5 minutes of arguing between the 2 people working there. They gave me my change, a 500 note. Story 8. I've had so many conversations with adults who do not understand how government benefits work, or hell, how their own Medicaid works. And I have talked to a few that didn't even know they were on Medicaid. They never questioned why they never paid for doctor's visits and medication, while also not paying anything for health insurance. I have seen someone ask for $10K in rental assistance, thinking that their local human services office can just hand over 10 grand to everyone who asks. They also deny they are in the exact same position as people they loudly complain are freeloaders, taking advantage of a system. So it's all right that you get food stamps, daycare assistance, Medicaid, Section 8 and gas vouchers, but God forbid someone you decide you don't like gets half that. Answer: the insurance thing. I remember in 2016 how many people even said, "I don't have Obamacare. I get my health care through the ACA," or the people currently that have had their own food stamps impacted and don't understand that that's part of welfare. It's baffling. I even saw someone the other day say the president can't possibly be a felon because felons can't be president. Story 9. I was in the Air Force for 10 years. Most important documents in the Air Force are PDFs. I lost track of how many times I had to show someone Control F. It was like watching cavemen discover fire. Answer: my brother is a journeyman plumber who was just made a manager in his company's office. The owner tasked him with finally eliminating paperwork in favor of apps and software that they already have. One of the old hands balked about having to retype everything. My brother showed him how to copy and paste, and it blew the guy's mind. The whole next week was just older plumbers and office ladies asking him to show them that copy and paste thing. Now they all think he's a technical genius. Story 10. My dad could not comprehend how people could just be poor, not have health insurance, or emergency savings, or a retirement account. I tried explaining the boots theory, and his response was to just buy the good boots from the start. Answer: I used to have a housemate that said something like this years ago. The GOVT, here in Australia, was matching voluntary superannuation payments. So like if you voluntarily topped up your super by 500, they'd kick in 500. Good scheme. My housemate turns to us and says, "So how much are you guys putting in?" The other housemate and I just looked at each other and were both like, "We can't afford to do that." We lived in a share house, FFS. To just assume we had the money was bit much. She kept on at us. "No, but it's a good investment. You'll see the money again. And interest, blah, blah, blah." "No, you don't understand. This is a good use of your money." She couldn't wrap her head around the fact that we weren't withholding our own money from super. We just didn't have any money. She couldn't understand it. "So take it from your savings." "We don't have savings." "Get it from your parents." My parents are just as broke as I am." Worse, my housemate said, "My parents are dead." Her response: "Oh, I'm sorry. So take it from your inheritance then." "What inheritance?" he says. "I don't have one of those." "Your parents didn't leave you any money? How selfish of them. Where did their money go when they died? What about their house?" The icing on the cake was when he explained, more gently than I would have by this point, that his parents hadn't had a house to leave him because they had rented. That's when she was like, "OMG, why would they do that? Where did all their money go?" Over the course of an hour, He and I basically established that she genuinely thought all families just had piles of money, property, investments, etc., etc. Like they were just things that magically appeared for everyone as they went through life. Actually working hard for stuff was a foreign concept to her, and low-paying jobs were just stuff people did until they matured and got real jobs. No matter how we explained it, she didn't want to understand. We gave up in the end. Story 11. My ex was convinced that tampons were inserted, and then you yank the cord like a fudge ripcord, and it inflates up in there like a goddamn lifeboat. He really truly believed that with all his stupid, idiot heart. Story 12. Back in the olden days when checks, or checks for my continental friends, were commonly used, I had a signed check in my desk drawer for a delivery I was expecting. I foolishly didn't have anything filled out, relying on my employee to fill it out when the delivery arrived. Unfortunately, her bum of a boyfriend found it first, and the first thought in his head that could only hold one thought at a time was, free money. He was confounded when he discovered that, gasp, canceled checks were returned to the owner. He had made it out to himself, cashed it, and was shocked. Shocked, I tell you, when he was arrested. Story 13. I had an in-law try to tell me how morally reprehensible people were in third world counties who do the mining tree cutting insert environmentally damaging practice here. And she wasn't talking about the companies or the leaders, but the basic workers. When I said people will do pretty much anything to be able to feed their families, she just responded that they should let their families starve to passing instead of cutting down trees in the rainforest. And that's what she would do. I was flabbergasted, including Russian prisoners who were drafted against their will because, according to my dad, they should just make more of an effort to be better informed. Now, what makes this truly stupid is that my dad is German, not German-American. And his dad fought for the Nazis in the Second World War. I pointed out to him that unless he also thinks his dad was evil, he's being a massive hypocrite. But according to him, that's different. He couldn't explain why, but still refused to change his opinion. Story 14. The amount of people that don't understand how a graduated tax system works hurts my brain. No, your entire salary doesn't get taxed at a higher rate because you went just over the limit into a higher tax bracket. Answer. I can't find the original comment, but someone explained it as filling a teacup over a drinking glass over a pitcher. As the teacup fills up and overflows, it fills the glass. That overflows into the pitcher. You're only paying the higher tax rate on the overflow. Think of it like a teacup suspended above a glass, suspended above a bucket. You can pour water into the teacup, but it will eventually overflow into the glass. The glass can hold more water than the teacup, but will eventually overflow into the bucket. Then, at the end, you have a full teacup, a full glass, and a partially full bucket. Anything extra you add is going into the bucket, but the stuff that was originally there isn't going to suddenly fall into the bucket. In this analogy, the teacup is the 10 bracket, the glass is the 12 bracket, and the bucket is the 22 bracket. The water is your income. Story 15. The amount of adults who don't understand the concept of compound interest never fails to astound me. Answer. I saw a post recently on a personal finance sub where the poster said their parents said to take all of their gains made in investments out of the market and put it in their checking account. Maybe that sentiment makes sense with gambling, but I couldn't believe someone would give their kid that advice with their investment funds. Eliminates any potential benefits of compounding interest. Story 16. I'm a construction worker. I was out in a field inspecting for a dirt crew placing storm pipes in the ground, and one of the guys looks up at the sky in awe. He says, "Holy shoot, guys, the moon is in the sky during the day." He was dead serious. He thought the moon only came out at night. This is a man with a wife and kids. Maybe he never looked at the sky growing up. He had forgotten about the eclipse that was a few weeks before it. The whole crew gave him crap all day, pointing out obvious stuff like clouds and shoot. Dude, how can a cloud come out? It's a sunny day. Answer. LOL reminds me of the story my high school astronomy teacher liked to tell. How shortly after being hired, he was stopped by another teacher, just making small conversation, who asked him, "Hey, so tell me why you can't see the moon in the daytime." They happened to be outside. Astronomy teacher looked up and said, "You mean that moon?" He of course wouldn't name which teacher this was. He'd just say the teacher does still work at the school, and thank goodness doesn't teach science. Story 17. Oh boy, had to tell a principal what dildo meant. A kid called another kid that on our way outside, and I pulled him aside and he told me he didn't know what it means. So I just told him we don't call people other words, especially when we don't know what it means. My principal saw, asked me what happened, and I told her the situation. She said, "What's so bad about that?" Apparently, she thought it had something to do with an armadillo. Answer: my wife's sister had an assignment where she had to add a new character to a story they had read that year. So she wrote a charming tale of Dildo Baggins. That started a hilarious chain at their small Catholic school of getting in trouble, calling the next person in line, then having them to pause to explain what a dildo was. Their mom disliked the story because it ended with her having to explain to her own grandmother what a dildo was. Story 18. Every time my mom drove the car while snow was falling, she'd comment about how windy it was outside, even if there was no wind. I tried to explain that it only looks windy because of the speed of the car, but she insisted that she was right. I pointed out that the wind always blew toward the front of the car no matter what direction we were traveling. I pointed out that the wind mysteriously stopped when the car stopped. None of this made any difference to her. Story 19. Trying to train people at my last job. I couldn't even get either of the guys under me to stack pallets properly. They'd constantly be throwing pallets into the pile upside down, sideways, or broken, then just keep throwing more on top until they had a teetering stack above their heads. I also had a hell of a time trying to teach them about stacking cases in pretty basic patterns and interlocking. I ended up making templates in Excel to try to demonstrate. One of them would still build multiple pallets into each other all the time, although he did seem to grasp the concept of interlocking at the point. Story 20. I was standing outside my office building with a coworker just chit-chatting when a gentleman walked past us with a dog wearing a service dog vest. She immediately said, "Thank you," fairly enthusiastically. The guy didn't break stride but had a confused look on his face. I asked her what that was about, and she thought the vest on the dog indicated that he was in the service, as in served our country. She was thanking the dog. Answer: oh my gosh, that happened to me. It's one of my favorite stories to tell. I got on a plane and had the window seat. A woman got on with a chihuahua in a tote bag and sat next to me, in the middle. After a bit, a guy sat down in the aisle seat. He was obviously trying to chat up this hot young blonde woman and says, "Oh wow, I didn't know they allowed dogs on planes." The blonde said, "Oh, it's a service dog." The man asked, "What branch?" The woman just looked at him. I was dying. This man asked what branch of the military the purse chihuahua was in. The blonde woman eventually said, "Oh, you know, like a support animal." And he said, "Oh," and did not say another word the rest of the flight. The chihuahua was perfectly behaved. I think I popped a blood vessel from trying not to laugh. Story 21. I used to work with attorneys. I'm in law school now, so I guess I still do, but fudge this old job I had, and was floored by the number of attorneys who don't know how email works. Like, I'd explain I was emailing them a link that would take them exactly where they needed to go, and they'd put me on hold to get their secretary to come operate their email for them. Answer: I just the other day got an internet email was sent by my staff at 10 o'clock in the morning on Friday. I got it yesterday, Tuesday. Why? Because it got tangled up with all these things going on the internet commercially. They want to deliver vast amounts of information over the internet. And again, the internet is not something that you just dump something on. It's not a big truck. It's a series of tubes. Former U.S. Senator Ted Stevens, now deceased, back in 2006. Story 22. Freshman college kids renting apartment. Mice problem. Big U.S. city. Both exterminator and I told them to keep food in fridge or hard plastic or metal container. Make it difficult for mice to find food and they'll go elsewhere. We also put out a couple of traps. Go back a week later and they had an open box of cereal next to a mouse trap. Still experiencing mice. When I reiterated putting food in hard containers to deter mice, they thought they would catch the 1 or 2 mice with cereal and be done. Had to explain there are millions of mice in the city, and catching one was not going to solve the problem. Answer: I had a couple of roommates who wouldn't put the trash, and we got mice. I informed them we had to clean up the mess, take the trash out regularly, and set traps. One soft-hearted roomie was fine with everything but the traps. His suggestion was, we just leave a little food out so the mice would stay under the sink. I had to explain that all that would do was guarantee more mice. Story 23. I was chatting with an older woman. She mentioned a shark attack at Cape Cod and said, "It's such a shame. I don't know why Mass doesn't do what Florida did." Confused, I said, "Oh, what did Florida do?" "Oh, they built a shark-proof fence all the way around the whole state." I just kind of blinked at her. Story 24. Oh, so much. I've met adults, like in their late 30s, 40s, who don't know what a tracking number is for shipping packages, who don't know how to use libraries. I've seen this in more young adults lately, who don't know how to use email. Answer: I was the go-to for helping patrons with no tech abilities. A decade ago when I worked in libraries, I have infinite patience for technologically challenged old folks who aren't related to me. I got older folks every day, but it was that one occasional teenager or 20-something that always felt weird. I don't even know how you get through middle school these days without understanding the basics of computer use. Story 25. Was once talking to a coworker about the age of exploration. He didn't know and refused to believe that you could navigate over land and water by using the stars and math as a guide. I once had to explain to my stepfather that the sun was not the biggest star in the universe, that it only looked big because we're close to it. Same guy also doesn't understand why people read. Story 26. I don't understand that shoot. I mean, where does the sun go at night? When talking to someone about the relative size of planets. Story 27. Just after Christmas 2023, my now late husband and I were at the airport, returning from visiting my parents who had loaded us up with gifts. The gate agent informed us that our bag was overweight and we would be charged something like an additional $200 for it. Realizing that one of the gifts from my parents was a large duffel bag, I asked how much it would cost to add a second bag. Only $50. Great! We'll step out of line, reshuffle some of the load to the second bag, and be back in a few minutes with 2 bags of appropriate weight. My normally bright, well-educated, and kind husband could not wrap his head around this. Kept looking at and talking to me like I was an absolute idiot for suggesting this. The desk agent tried to explain it too. I was just like, I literally don't understand how you don't understand that taking things out of a bag makes it lighter. The charge is for each individual bag, not the cumulative total. Eventually he agreed, rudely, but didn't seem like he ever got it. By mid-January, his behavior had become so erratic and often mean that I confronted him, believing he was having a manic episode. I'll spare the rest of the details, but he was dead by March of 2025. If there is a moral to this story, it's that I'd like to see more research done on the brain impairment caused by mania and bipolar disorder. There does seem to be some similarity in symptoms to Alzheimer's, but it doesn't appear that much research has been done in this avenue. Answer: I'm bipolar and it's fairly well managed, but you never can promise you'll never have an episode again. I told my wife the common signs of my depression and manic episodes to keep an eye out for. If she ever tells me, I think you're manic right now, she's right until a doctor proves her wrong. Since if I am indeed manic, I am likely not in a mental state to recognize it. Sorry for your loss. Story 28. My sister-in-law's boyfriend, much younger than me, Gen Z, thought postboxes were decorative historical. He was astonished to hear that you could actually put letters into them and someone would come and take them out to deliver them to the recipient. Story 29. I have a coworker who has somehow managed to hang on to her job for the last 8 years. We work in a professional setting where most people have graduate degrees. She has a very well-earned reputation for being an unreliable collaborator who just does her own thing no matter what. Last week, we had a walk and talk where she expressed absolute astonishment at the idea that decisions made in meetings serve to establish expectations about who will do what and what the timeline is. Story 30. Had to explain to an ex-boyfriend that there are such things as continents, and there wasn't just Europe. He couldn't understand why Australia, at the time, and America weren't in the Eurovision Song Contest. Also thought the continent of Africa was in fact one whole country. His mind was blown when I showed him a map. Also had to get the history books out as he believed dinosaurs were made up and weren't real. Had to explain evolution. He couldn't understand it. Story 31. I was consulting for somebody who had a successful business, but was looking for investments to expand. Was looking at his pitch deck and the conversation went something like this. Me, I'm not mathematician, but even at close glance, your numbers are wrong. Him, impossible. Turns out I was right. This Muppet didn't know the difference between gross and net. How the fudge he managed to stay out of the red still baffles me to this day. I think if he had been in a traditional industry, he would have been fudge, honestly. LOL. Had another guy in a meeting raise his hand as we were going through something I put together. Him. I'm a little confused. Who is this Roy fella? Me. Roy? There are no names in that document. He didn't know what ROI was and thought it was a different spelling for Roy. Answer. That reminds me of the first time I was tasked to take meeting minutes at my first job in the tech sector. I had no idea what most of the terms being discussed were, but I proudly presented my nicely formatted notes to my boss for a quick check prior to distribution. He asked me why I kept repeating the word GUI in my notes. I said, IDK, you guys kept talking about it though, and it sounded important. They were talking about the GUI. Story 32. My friend, a nice guy and everything, has always been struggling to make ends meet, also due to some questionable choices. And through the years, I've had to explain him that the following ideas wouldn't have given him the extra income I need. MLM, merchless, but still a Ponzi scheme. Online trading crypto, AI-generated content, drop shipping, basically any get-rich-quick scheme advertised online over the last 10 to 15 years. Like, dude, come on, you're 50, not 15. You've been around long enough to know what is blatant, fraudulent advertisement and what could actually work. Answer. My parents are like this. They jumped on every get-rich-quick scheme that people put in front of them. That's why we were always in debt and couldn't afford food sometimes. They were so gullible they couldn't even fathom getting a real job. Since I was 12, I told them constantly to get real jobs and stop the BS. But to this day, they're still falling. I'm so glad I left. Story 33. Smart guy I worked with, had an MBA from a major university. Told me he didn't believe in evolution. Said he had seen single-cell animals under a microscope, which proved that they're still here and didn't evolve into us. Dude thought things evolved like fudge Pokemon. Answer. I work in higher education. A colleague recently told me that he isn't sure the Earth is round. I started joking with him like, oh no, are you a flat earther? He said, of course not. He knows the Earth isn't totally flat. He just isn't sure it's totally round either. Another colleague asked what he thought about the images of Earth taken from space. He said, well, I wasn't there. I don't know if we've actually been to space. They could just fake those pictures. We all had to abandon the conversation. He's always seemed very normal and rational. I had no idea he believed in conspiracy theories. Story 34. Input a customer's address as Denmark, the Netherlands, because they thought Denmark was a city in the Netherlands. Saw that the copier printer was giving an out-of-toner message, and instead of asking someone or looking at the directions on the display to replace the cartridge, decided to scan the document to themselves and then print it from their computer by sending it to the same copier printer. Story 35. The last election. A young work colleague. I don't know who to vote for. No one's ever told me who to vote for. Answer. When I was a bartender, this lady came in for a drink. We were slow, she was awesome, so we got to talking. Turns out she was a state representative, so I asked her how she ended up running. She's Latina and lived in a Spanish section of our city. She said the previous rep that she replaced had been in office for a really long time and was super corrupt, so she decided to challenge him and managed to win. The dude was so corrupt, during election season, he'd knock on people's doors with a list of registered voters. When the person answered the door, he'd point to their name on the list and tell them they were on his list of people who are supposed to vote for him. It worked for decades until she came along. Story 36. If we book this recurring meeting from your personal Outlook calendar, then when someone else needs to take over this work stream, you will have to delete all the meetings, and the new lead will have to recreate them in their own personal calendar. Because Outlook does not let us transfer ownership of meetings, plus you forwarded the invite to a bunch of people instead of just inviting them, so updates and acceptances won't display properly. There's no way of ever handing these meetings over to someone else. If we book the recurring event from the shared team calendar instead, which we all have access to, then we don't have to delete it and start all over every time the lead changes. And as a bonus, if you're off sick, then someone else can either reschedule or just join and lead the meeting, which we can't do otherwise because you still won't unhide your calendar from us so we can't see what's in it. This person earns at least twice what I do and has to be talked through sharing his screen in Teams at least once a week. They have declared that all meetings must come from personal calendars. We cannot use the team calendar. I am so tired. Answer. I worked with an older guy who didn't understand how his email worked in general. We worked at a big corporate hospital together and got tons of emails. IDK how email has been around and used frequently for over a decade, and people still exist that don't even know how to open it up. Even worse, my mom had an intern at her work and she was tasking him with sending emails. People kept saying they weren't receiving them. Turns out, this kid had such awful typos that his emails were going to people's spam boxes. This kid was an intern in a master's degree program. My mom had to have a serious talk with him about at least using spell check. Story 37. It's commonly accepted that friends are attentive to each other. Ongoing conversation from a few weeks ago, but one of my newer friends walked away from me literally mid-conversation and never came back to it or me. However, when I raised it with her later and it happened again, she blamed me for not noticing she'd got distracted. I said that distractions happen, but it was important to recover once you'd realized you'd drifted off. She told me she couldn't ever promise to be attentive. We're friends apparently, but she can mentally drift off whenever she likes without any consequences. Honestly made me feel insane having that conversation. Story 38. A few years ago, everyone was talking about an upcoming solar eclipse. It was a pretty big deal. Hotels were selling out in the path, for instance. My coworkers were discussing the possibility of using our welding shields to view it, and our janitor overheard the conversation. He said, "You don't actually believe in that, do you?" I assumed he meant that our welding shields wouldn't be enough protection, or that he thought we were talking about something else. But another coworker asked him to clarify. He then emphasized, "You don't believe in eclipses, do you? You guys are supposed to be pretty smart. If the moon went into the sun, it would obviously melt." Story 39. It took me a while to realize that my warehouse employee was illiterate. I would give him a list of products. He would retrieve them with no issue. But when I asked him verbally to get something, he just couldn't. He was matching words on the page to words on the product. He just didn't know what the words said. I'm impressed he's done as well as he has. So my great irony is, I have to write down words for my illiterate employee because he can't read. Answer. I was shocked a few years ago when I read about functional illiteracy. The percentage is stupidly high even in countries with mandatory schooling. I never even thought it was possible someone could read everyday words, but not be able to understand what the words are telling them. Simple things too, not just concepts that require other concepts to be known or assumed. Story 40. Just a few years ago, I had to explain how to copy and paste to an executive assistant. We work for a global corporation. Story 41. In my country, Poland, they've added new subject to schools, health education. It has many topics, and intimacy education is part of it. Of course, many stupid people say it's not necessary because parents can talk with kids, and it will teach kids how to self-care and have intimacy. There was an interview about how unnecessary health education is with 3 male politicians. The woman host asked them what it's the difference between period and ovulation, and they didn't know. Story 42. Fudge, reply all on emails where I've included you and another person on purpose. Don't just reply to me, especially if I keep re-adding that second recipient with every reply, especially if your job relies on email communication and you've likely grew up with the internet. No excuses. I'm astonished how often I have to explicitly ask people, please reply all to keep so-and-so in the conversation in the year of your Lord 2025. Story 43. Not trying to be political, but the people parroting, "We wouldn't have so many cases of COVID if we just stopped testing," had a real hard time getting past that stupid logic. Story 44. I was checking out at Target at the U-Scan and knew an item I was buying was 20 off. When I scanned it, it was going from $109.99 to $103.99, not 20. So I called an employee over and explained the situation, and she was confused. She was telling me that I got the sale with the $103.99 price. When I said that 20 off $109.99 would be $87.99, she got an attitude and literally said, "No, it's not, ma'am. It's only a couple cents." She was speaking to me like I was trying to run one over on her. I was floored that she didn't understand basic math. She had to be mid-20s. How do you calculate tips if you don't know what 20 of something is, or think it's only a couple cents? I'm still shocked by this. Story 45. This is a small one, but I recently learned that my significant other never knew that Bob was short for Robert. He thought they were completely different names and was blown away when I showed him that pretty much everyone he knows as Bob is actually named Robert. Same for Bill William. Answer. My mom had to deal with the opposite. My dad was called Bob, but it wasn't short for Robert. It was short for Bowden. But he went by Bob his whole life. When he died, she called all the companies to cancel transfer services, and some refused to let her. "We need to speak to Robert. There's no such person." "Well, that's the name on the account." "No, it's Bob." "Yes, that's right. The account is under the full name Robert. That's not his name." There is no Robert. Yes, ma'am. I understand he died, but we need a passing certificate for Robert. That's not the name on the passing certificate. Well, ma'am, you'll need to get the certificate with his full name. It already is in his full name, which is not Robert. Well, then is Robert not the one who died? If Robert isn't the person who died, then we need to speak to Robert. There is no Robert. Yes, I understand he is dead now, but oh my God. Some of them she just gave up on, like updating doctors' lists, etc. Just ignores the letters. It's not worth it. Story 46. That person was me. I was way too old when I figured out how paper was made. Paper is made from wood, no? How do they cut the wood so thin to make it? Yeah, that's not how you make paper. Story 47. She didn't know that a thesaurus was a book. She didn't believe me and said that a thesaurus was a dinosaur. Story 48. People learning I have type 1 diabetes, which, to simplify, is an autoimmune disorder where one's immune system inexplicably attacks the pancreas, rendering it, thus far, though research has been ongoing for like a century, irreversibly incapable of naturally producing insulin. Type 1 differs from the far more common type 2, in which the pancreas is still capable of producing insulin, but doesn't use it effectively. And being surprised because I don't look fat, which obesity isn't even the sole factor for developing type 2 diabetes. It increasingly does not discriminate. Then asking if I've tried diet, exercise to put my diabetes in remission, or if I've heard of Ozempic, and supposedly listening to me attempt to explain the above, and that while my condition is permanent, I can eat whatever I want so long as I check my blood sugar, do the math, and manually inject myself with the corresponding insulin I require. Then responding, so you're allergic to sugar then? And strictly monitoring everything I eat thereafter, refusing to accept that in the short term, hypoglycemia is an equal, if not greater, danger to diabetics than hyperglycemia. Even insurance companies, who really dislike the ongoing, unpredictable, and expensive as needed nature of treating type 1 diabetes for not fitting their business model, and want it to be a one cheap pill per day condition. And ER doctors, who are more familiar with the type 2 default mode, have come at me with this stuff. TLDR, am jealous of the blissful ignorance enjoyed by those who possess a pancreas that successfully does its job and automatically adapts to their needs by naturally producing the insulin needed to remain in the limited range of normal blood sugars. Answer. Oh, I hear you. The amount of times I've explained T1D to those who asked, then they say they understand and start repeating things about type 2, or even just myths they heard about. I am just concerned in medical situations, or medical adjacent, dentists, physiotherapy, hospitals, and anything not endocrine. They just keep thinking everything is type 2. I truly dislike filling out intake forms for anything not endocrine. There's always a list of conditions in diabetes, no type is written, and autoimmune. I check autoimmune and diabetes, and they ask which autoimmune disease I have. I say T1D. They say, no, that's diabetes. I say yes, and it's autoimmune, and you didn't list type. Once had a pharmacist argue that with me. I could go on, and then they have the script they pull out when they read, diabetes. Do you watch your diet and exercise? I never know how to answer that one without sounding smarmy. I say, no, I don't need to diet, never have. And yes, as an athlete, I do indeed exercise. Then I've been told things like, well, I've had a lot of diabetics who didn't control it, and you need to know you should control it. I say I agree. And if I didn't control it, I'd be dead. I can try to explain or just nod my head, but they don't know how much it can affect a T1D when they think we're all T2 or insulin resistant. Long speech, but so tired of medical or dental staff not understanding what T1D is. No disparity towards T2s. They have their own stigma to advocate and fight for better treatment. But us T1s are shoved to the wayside with policies and hospital procedures or medical adjacents who are not trained in our autoimmune disease. Not to mention the stigma we face online. It's all tiring. Story 49. Having to explain to grown adults that I was born and raised in America, so that why I don't have a British accent like my dad's. Story 50. I used to work in a retail copy center, and we had a self-serve fax machine. This one woman came up to me after sending her fax, which she showed me, and said, it didn't work. It gave it back. I guess she thought faxes work like those pneumatic tubes at the bank or something. I developed quite a poker face working there because I often had moments where I couldn't tell if people were genuinely clueless or if they were messing with me. Story 51. Was talking with a guy in his late 60s about climate change, and he tries arguing that winters are still cold. I go, wait, do you really not know the difference between weather and climate? For anyone who doesn't, weather, short-term events, days, localized, climate, long-term trends, centuries, widespread. Answer. On that topic, I've had several people, typically older, middle-aged, tell me that there's no climate change happening, global warming is a hoax and all that jazz, but just a few sentences later be reminiscing about the winters we'd used to have in our area and how we just don't get snow around here like we used to when I was a kid. I remember getting 2 to 3 feet of snow nearly every year. Now we barely get flurries if we get anything at all, and not putting these two ideas together at all. Story 52. A while ago, I was door knocking for a local city council candidate in my city on the block where I live. We have a really active block, and I know a lot of my neighbors. I caught my one neighbor a few houses down who we were friendly with, and our kids played together often. Started talking to him about the issues in our neighborhood, the election, and my candidate. The man didn't know what a city council was, that we even had one, or what it did. Just thought the mayor did everything. Also didn't know who our mayor was, which maybe wouldn't be too surprising. But she lived on our block and he had met and spoken with her many times. Never put it together that she was the mayor. Story 53. Recently, I had to explain to an American friend that a U.S. tariff is a U.S. tax placed on items imported into the USA. The buyer of the item, importer, has to pay that tax to the IRS. This tax must be passed on to the consumer by the importer. Somehow he had the idea the exporting country paid the tax. Zero clue how an adult could get such a jerk-backwards idea. Story 54. My husband was divorced before I met him. He had owned a house, which was sold and the proceeds divided between him and his ex. She was shocked at the tiny amount she got, saying the house was worth $350,000, and therefore she wanted her $175,000. Period. End of story. They'd only owned it for a year and had barely made a dent in the mortgage, but it meant not a jot to her, and she simply could not accept any explanations otherwise. To this day, she'll tell anyone how she was screwed out of her rightful windfall. Story 55. Was a team led quality control in manufacturing for a while, and another slightly younger gal got hired around the same time as me for another team lead position. So we were peers. She had a college degree though, so she made a couple more dollars an hour than I did. One day we were working together on the floor, and she was talking about wanting to visit Brazil with her sons someday. This was before the Olympics there, and she had been saying how much she wanted to go. That made me wonder how different the Olympics would be, being that it would be winter in Brazil, while we watched the games in the summer here in the States. She was confused and asked me to clarify. I thought she was joking and mentioned how seasons are opposite in northern versus southern hemispheres, and she didn't believe me. I thought she was pulling my leg the whole time until she insisted she needed to. Look that up later to make sure I wasn't trying to pull a fast one on her. Answer. I once made an entire subreddit angry because a whole lot of people refused to believe that July is winter in Australia. A few of them tried to double down on their idiocy by telling me they were actually right because it can only really be winter after the winter equinox, so it must actually be autumn, and therefore I was still wrong somehow. They straight up refused to believe that I might know what winter feels like in the country I live in. Story 56. Context. I am gay. During dinner with family, I brought up something about being gay, and my cousin's boyfriend said, "Isn't that the same as bestiality?" I wasn't even offended because his tone and facial expressions meant he was so serious, and he is known for not knowing too much in general. Answer. I'm also gay. I don't know if it was the same where you live, but in my country, back when being gay was still illegal, those two things actually were grouped together under the same criminal charge. Unzucht gegen die Natur. Fornication that goes against nature. And in most countries, being gay was only decriminalized a couple of decades ago. So he may have actually heard that from an older conservative relative or something, and just dumbassly never questioned it. Story 57. This lady I knew didn't understand why pumpkins lasted so long unopened and tried to convince me they were fake. I literally had to explain the concept of skin to her. Story 58. We had a talk show in the Netherlands where a guest, a singer-songwriter called Maan, asked how we knew all the names of the dinosaurs, given that they were all extinct. Apparently, she didn't understand that humans thought of those names, or I guess animal names in general. Story 59. I was either a sophomore or junior in high school and had a history teacher make an offhand comment about how they need to use specific whiteboard marker colors so kids who were colorblind could see them. Except the way he explained it made it seem like anyone who was colorblind to a color straight up didn't see anything, like it was invisible. So me, being absolutely baffled, asked him to clarify because I couldn't believe an adult just said that, and he doubled down saying that the board would look blank if someone was colorblind. I asked him if I was colorblind to green and looked outside at the grass. Would it just be a void of nothing? He then got mad and said he didn't want to talk about it anymore. Story 60. Every single day at my job as I work serving mostly old people at a restaurant. Just yesterday, I got berated by an older couple after they abruptly got up from the booth they were sat in by the host and moved to the one right next to it. I walk up to greet them, and they start unloading on me about how ridiculous the other booth was. Convo goes like this. Them. I can't believe it. You have a booth where my husband's sitting on the one side, can't even squeeze in barely, and I'm on the other side like 2 feet away from the table. How is anyone supposed to eat like that? What a stupid design. M.E. You do know the table just moves, right? The M. What? What do you mean? M.E. The table. It just moves, like it just slides on the floor. The M. What do you mean it just moves? So I walk over, slide the table over about 6 inches to the one side to show them. Of course, as these things seem to go, that just pisses them off even more. LMFAO. God, I really need a new job. Story 61. My American friend didn't quite understand the concept of other countries knowing and speaking different languages. You're Swedish, right? Do you speak English with your family? No, I speak Swedish with my family. Ah. How did you learn Swedish? What followed was a bizarre explanation about native tongues, overlapping languages, and earth-shattering realization that American, just like Mexican and Brazilian, aren't languages, and that most houses in Europe are older than the United States. Story 62. My first husband, when we were dating, he didn't know women have different exits for their monthly and their bladders. It was interesting to explain what I thought school anatomy covered, but whatever, lol. Story 63. The woman on my bus, talking to her friends, and shocked to find out that, even though she lives on the other side of the country, the sun still rises in the east for her. Story 64. Zipper. Merge. The same mouth-breathing morons whose children ask if you have games on your phone, see the zipper and go, they're letting people in. Then them and their 6 dumbest friends try to squeeze in front of the same person, usually a semi-truck. Traffic comes to a stop and backs up from there. Everyone has to wake up 15 minutes earlier because this sort of person is allowed a license. Answer. Just driving on highways in general. I see so many people cruising in the left lane without any other cars nearby. There was a whole bus there the other day. I got on a highway yesterday from a ramp that turns into a lane, and the person next to me passed me to get into my lane and slow down instead of just slowing down and getting behind. The car in front of me decided to brake to let 2 of them in, leaving barely any room for the third car to pull in front of me. I really need to get a place closer to work. Story 65. My roommate thought we can't get mosquitoes because we're on the 2nd floor, and that spraying just the stairs will be enough to keep ants out. Story 66. The metric system. I work as a merchant marine, U.S. When I was second mate was once discussing taking on fuel and ballasting with the captain. The ship was built in Singapore, so the tanks and tables were in metric. We were going to load 350 cubic meters of diesel, and captain asked how much ballast water we were going to discharge. Me. Little over 300 tons. Metric. Captain, are you sure? Me. Yay. Diesel is about 12 lighter than seawater. Captain. Yeah, but how many cubes? Me. Same. Little over 300 cubic meters of water. Captain, how do you know? Me. You know the metric system is based on weight of a gram of water, right? 1 metric ton is 1,000 liters, is 1,000 kg. Captain, wait. What? Fuck. That makes sense. Story 67. I learned a couple of years ago that one of my coworkers didn't know how many letters there are in the alphabet. Story 68. I'm a teacher. Schools teach to statewide standardized tests, and there's no history test, at least in my state. So if your student is doing well in math and English, and science to a lesser extent, they are thriving. Now, teacher hat off. Personally, I think this is by design, and the government actively doesn't want people to know history. An ignorant population is easier to control. Story 69. My girlfriend had it with me. She told me about her therapy, in which she has to imagine a hallway with windows, and each window represents a different time in her life, filled with bad memories of bullying, etc., which she is trying to process. While she was telling me that, I just stared at her blankly, because I didn't know what she was talking about. Imagining a hallway? This in turn led me down a rabbit hole online, and I have aphantasia apparently all my life. I can't form mental images, like thinking about a red apple and seeing a red apple in my mind. I always thought that if someone thought of something, it was figure of speech. I had no clue it was normal to actually see things when thinking about them. It's pretty rare, as about 2 to 4 of people have it as well. This is what I see when I describe a horse. I can recall where everything goes and go into great detail on what a horse looks like. But this is what is happening in my mind. Story 70. My ex-husband confidently stated that what made the town we lived in was 2,000 kilometers above sea level. We lived on the coast. He was derisive and dismissive when I pointed out the contradiction. Story 71. Double-clicking on a computer. There was older woman, 50s, 60s maybe, who was interning at the healthcare office where I worked in the billing and records department. I was trying to show her how we scanned in records and papers, then organized them in the very basic file system. I was watching her work, and she just could not get this to open. This poor woman didn't know what a double click of the mouse was and was absolutely struggling. Even trying to tell her, "Oh, you have to click the mouse button twice," didn't quite work because she clicked so slowly the system didn't register it as a double click. I legitimately spent about 20 minutes trying to teach someone, in 2016, how to double click a mouse. She lasted one day. Story 72. My sister told me just today that she was recently talking with our mom about mental health. When my sister was younger, she sought help for depression, and my mom said, "I never understood how you were diagnosed with depression. Your blood work always came back clean." I know my sister was a little disappointed, knowing that my mom never did any research to find out what her daughter was going through. Story 73. Technically adults, but in college, my roommate thought chocolate milk came from brown cows. I was dumbfounded that he lived his life thinking that. Story 74. 6'7", and tore his knee, ACL. Couldn't understand why the surgery had to wait until they could find a cadaver that size. He didn't know what a cadaver was. Awkward conversation in the restaurant. Story 75. I once had a coworker, fully adult woman in her 40s, who was convinced that she loses an hour of sleep every night during daylight saving time. Story 76. Coworkers proudly denying overtime opportunities because they don't want to get taxed more. The more you make, the more they take. Wait a minute. You're denying time and a half to do the easiest job in the company because you think it will cost you at the end of the year? That's not how that works. You're only hit at a higher tax rate if you end up in the higher bracket. And it's only the money above the lower bracket that's taxed at that rate. So guess who works 8-2 most Saturdays and ends up stacking his HSA with that extra money, getting an extra benefit in the back end at tax time? Stupid works out for someone in the end. Story 77. When my brother, a single guy without kids and a high-paying job, was trying to convince me, a married guy with 2 kids and a lot of debt, to buy a boat, especially after he said that we all have the same 24 hours in the day, and me saying that I can't find time or money for a boat is just an excuse. Story 78. One woman who didn't like the farm near where she lived. Why do they even keep these farms operating? With all the grocery stores we have now, we don't need that many farms anymore. Story 79. Not huge, but recently my brother said that he doesn't understand why the moon goes through phases. He thought it should always be full. I tried to explain it to him and drew a picture, and he still didn't get it. I let it go because I didn't want to shame him too much over it, but come on. Answer. Go outside with a ball on a sunny day. Hold it out. Turn your body 360. You'll see the ball go through phases. In this model, your head is the Earth, the ball is the moon, and the sun is the sun. To get a full moon instead of a lunar eclipse, you have to hold it at kind of an angle. In reality, the moon's orbit is slightly tilted with respect to the Earth's orbit, but it is also pretty far away. Story 80. I was attending meetings for a non-religious organization, and every time the meeting would end with a prayer, and in Jesus' name we pray. I voiced my concern that we were not being inclusive enough and suggested that, at the very least, we could have a more generic prayer that didn't include Jesus. Story 81. Well, right now it's speed cameras. How drivers complain about not just getting their first ticket, but getting tickets over and over again. What's the matter with them? Do they keep making the same mistakes at work? Then there are drivers parked inside bike lanes. What is it about the no parking, no stopping sign they don't understand? Story 82. Seen on TV, Representative Hank Johnson, GA, was concerned about the U.S. military buildup on the island of Guam. He said, "My fear is the whole island will become so overpopulated that it will tip over and capsize." Story 83. I used to have this report who would always ask me really simple questions I would have to look up. Easy to look up stuff. I told her after the second time I was just looking it up and she could save time and look it up herself. 1,000 requests later, I told her she needed to be more independent and look things up herself. She said she didn't know how. I made her show me. She literally had never Googled something ever. She didn't know you could. Mind you, she was in a remote computer-based job. She was so dumb and clueless in so many ways. I couldn't fathom how she got hired. She didn't know how to look back through emails, so she printed them when she got them, so she would have them to review. It's stunning to me. Story 84. There was a thunderstorm outside. We were talking about lightning and thunder. They didn't believe me when I said that the thunder was the sound of the lightning. Not even after I explained that that was why you could count the seconds in between the lightning and the thunder to figure out how far away the storm was. They just said, "I don't believe that." Story 85. I once had to explain to a grown man the difference between a square and a rectangle. I actually had to say, "It's like a square but longer," and the entire time I thought he was going to be offended. Answer. I work with a sweet lady. We'll call her Sarah. She takes customer calls. She is kind, patient, and amazing with our customers. Sometimes, however, I do question her understanding of the world. We were selling a wreath in our catalog, and Sarah got a call from a customer wanting to know how big the wreath was. So I told her it was 13 inches. She's like, "No, the customer wants all the dimensions." Okay, so I measured the depth, and that was 5 inches. She's like, "No, I need all the dimensions." I said, "Okay, Sarah, it's 13 inches wide, 5 inches deep." She's like, "Well, what about the height?" I didn't want to be condescending, but I was like, "Sarah, it's a wreath, so it's a circle. So it's 13 inches wide and 13 inches tall." She was like, "See, Lilac, that's all I needed to know." I was like, okay, Sarah. Bye. Story 86. Had a roommate at university who didn't know how to use a can opener. This was in the 80s, and we were in our third year. And no, she wasn't from a wealthy family. Story 87. Had to explain to an ex-coworker, female, sleeping with a woman while dating a guy is cheating. She was hell-bent on thinking it wasn't cheating because I'm bi-curious, and it's a girl. It doesn't count. Made me lose all respect for her as a person, TBH. Story 88. That our sun is a star, just like all the stars you see in the night sky. Why we always see the same side of the moon. What causes tides? Why we get neap tides? Why there are different phases of the moon? Maybe because I grew up on the ocean. But really, you have never wondered any of these things and Googled it? Story 89. My former coworker did not understand yes or no questions. She kept giving such blatantly wrong answers that I finally had to ask her what she thought yes and no meant. She was fired because she was a moron. Story 90. Teachers in districts that run in the traditional school year model do not get paid in the summer for not working. They get paid in the summer, often one check in June, equal to about 4 extra paychecks, in arrears for work they did the previous 10 months, because the paying town wants to spread the salary payments out to earn the interest on those funds. It's a union school board negotiable item that school boards often ask for. It's not free money for teachers. Story 91. Guy complained about how hard it is to take the plastic inner cap off of deodorant. He didn't realize you could just turn the dial to raise the deodorant up and easily pull the inner cap off. Story 92. I owed a friend, 40-year-old female, some money, so I stopped by her house when she wasn't home and put an envelope with a check inside into her mailbox and texted her that I had done that. She told me that I made a huge mistake and she'd never get the check because she was getting home late. Do you have a problem with mailbox thieves in your neighborhood or something? I asked. No, but the mailman comes around 2 p.m. and will take it. This is how I learned that she had no idea that the flag on mailboxes was to let the mail carrier know there's mail to take and otherwise only drop stuff off. Story 93. Every day at work, I have older folks look at me with nothing behind their eyes as I explain how to scan a barcode. Story 94. My favorite example is when an American kept insisting that in my country, there just had to be an Independence Day. I'm French. It started because I told them July 14th, what you guys call Bastille Day, though we don't call it that, was not an equivalent of July 4th in the US. It is no independence. We didn't become independent from anyone. In fact, throughout most of our history, we've been the colonizers. People got their independence from us. Couldn't compute. Then the conversation shifted because they started arguing that we got our independence from the monarchy, which, from a U.S. perspective, I understand that's where your mind goes, but that's wrong for us. July 14th commemorates, well, in part at least, the events of 1789, with the storming of the Bastille, which eventually led to the fall of Louis XVI. But monarchy didn't end there. After these events, France had more kings, Louis XVIII, and later Louis Philippe. Hell, we had an emperor for a while. Napoleon, anyone? And we actually don't celebrate anything for the end of their reigns either, so still no Independence Day. I could not get through to them. They really needed to think we had an Independence Day of some kind, like the sky would fall if we didn't. Story 95. I worked with a young woman who was about 24 and had a bachelor's degree. She didn't realize that if you canceled a credit card, you still had to pay the balance. She thought it erased her debt. She told us that she had this great plan. She couldn't believe nobody had thought of it before. She was going to buy all new furniture and a new TV, and then I will just cancel the card and get it all for free. She didn't believe me when I told her she would still have to pay her bills. I kind of wonder whatever happened to her and if she is still that ignorant, naive. Story 96. I shouldn't eat meat for health reasons. Any meat. I discovered that most people at my work think vegetarian means pescatarian. When I had to explain, I couldn't eat the tuna sandwich they prepared for the vegetarians. Thankfully, I'm the only one on my office, and I'm also used to intermittent fasting. Story 97. I work for a veterinarian who is a Trumpy anti-vaxxer. She made fun of me for getting my COVID and flu vaccines this season, and then turned around to chastise a client for not vaccinating their dog when she recommended. Well, when your dog gets, you'll wish you'd listened. What? Story 98. My wife doesn't understand that turning the thermostat down does not make cold air. It just stops the unit from producing heat. She also has lit a candle and placed it right under our thermostat in the wintertime, and then doesn't understand why the heat isn't working, because the house is 50 degrees, but the thermostat thinks it's 85 because there's a literal fire 2 feet below it. Story 99. I was 17 at the time, but at work I had to explain to an adult man that the apple saplings we sold wouldn't start bearing fruit for a few years because younger trees are easier to transport and plant. He was like, why wouldn't I just go to the grocery store and buy apples then? Had to hit him with the deadpan. I don't know, sir, because I already couldn't believe we were having this conversation. That's it for this video. Don't forget to support Vancher and my second channel, Vanchoose. See you soon.